What if I told you that the Aztecs maintained crystal-clear drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people in a city built on top of a lake, a salty, murky lake, without pumps, without electricity, without modern filtration systems, and kept that water fresh and safe for decades, using only stone, clay, and an understanding of hydraulics that would make modern engineers pause in admiration? Deep in the heart of what is now Mexico City, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan rose from the waters of Lake Texcoco around 1325 CE, eventually becoming one of the largest cities in the world, with a population estimated between 200,000 and 400,000 people by the time Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519. The city sprawled across approximately 5 square miles or 13 square kilometers of artificial islands and was connected by an intricate network of canals that served as streets. Yet here's what baffles hydrological engineers today. How did the Aztecs solve the seemingly impossible problem of providing clean, fresh drinking water to this massive population when their entire city sat in the middle of a lake that was part fresh, part saline, constantly mixing, flooding, and threatening to contaminate their water supply? Modern water treatment facilities require sophisticated pumping stations, chemical treatments, multiple filtration stages, and constant energy input to purify water for cities of similar size. Yet the Aztecs accomplished this feat with what we might call Stone Age technology, and they didn't just manage it. They mastered it so completely that Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote in his chronicles that the water in Tenochtitlan was sweeter and better than any water in Spain. A remarkable statement considering the Aztecs had no access to modern chemistry, no understanding of bacteria or pathogens as we know them, and no mechanical pumps to move water uphill against gravity. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, you need to picture Lake Texcoco as it existed in the 15th and 16th centuries. A complex body of water sitting at approximately 7,400 feet or 2,250 meters above sea level in the Valley of Mexico, surrounded by mountains and fed by multiple rivers and streams flowing down from the highlands. The lake wasn't uniform. It was actually a system of 5 interconnected shallow lakes with varying levels of salinity, and this is crucial to understanding the Aztec water challenge. The southern portions of the lake system, fed by freshwater springs and streams from the mountains, contained relatively fresh water, while the northern sections, particularly the main body of Lake Texcoco, where Tenochtitlan was built, had become increasingly saline over centuries due to evaporation in the valley's enclosed basin with no natural outlet to the sea. Imagine trying to build a thriving metropolis in the middle of a giant puddle that's slowly turning into a salt flat, where heavy rains could flood your city in hours, where the water you're surrounded by is too salty to drink, and where you need to provide fresh water to hundreds of thousands of people every single day. The Aztecs didn't just accept these constraints, they engineered around them with a sophistication that Dr. Candace Lucy, a researcher in hydraulic archaeology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, describes as a complete hydrological management system that integrated water supply, flood control, and water quality management into a single, functioning network that operated continuously for nearly 2 centuries. When archaeologists and engineers examine the remnants of this system today, using ground-penetrating radar, historical maps, and excavations of Aztec infrastructure, they find evidence of engineering principles that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until centuries later, and they're forced to confront an uncomfortable question. How did a civilization without written mathematical equations, without steel tools, without the wheel for transport, and without draft animals design and build a water management system that functioned more efficiently than many modern systems in terms of energy use and environmental impact? The genius of the Aztec water system began with a fundamental understanding of what modern engineers call source water protection, and their first and most ambitious project was the construction of massive dikes to physically separate fresh water from salt water within the lake system itself. The most famous of these was the Albarradón de Nezahualcóyotl, named after the poet king of Texcoco, who oversaw its construction around 1449 CE, a colossal earthwork and stone barrier that stretched for approximately 10 miles or 16 kilometers across Lake Texcoco, effectively creating a freshwater zone on one side and keeping the saltier water on the other. Look at the scale of this construction for a moment. The dike rose approximately 12 to 16 feet, or 3.7 to 4.9 meters above the water surface, and extended deep into the lakebed. Built entirely by hand, using millions of stone blocks, wooden pilings, and carefully layered earth, all transported across the lake by canoe, since the Aztecs had no wheeled vehicles or pack animals suitable for the marshy terrain. The dike wasn't a simple straight wall either. Archaeological evidence shows it incorporated sluice gates, adjustable openings that could be opened or closed to control water flow between the two zones, and these gates were positioned at strategic intervals to manage water levels dynamically based on rainfall, evaporation, and the city's water needs. Dr. Charles Gibson, whose 1964 work on Aztec society remains foundational in understanding Aztec infrastructure, documented how the dike system included wooden compuertas, or floodgates, that were operated by teams of specialized workers who monitored water levels and adjusted the gates according to seasonal conditions, essentially functioning as human computers, performing constant hydraulic calculations. What's extraordinary about this is that the Aztecs understood a principle that modern water engineers call source water segregation, the idea that it's far more efficient to keep clean water clean from the start than to try to purify contaminated water after the fact, and they implemented this principle at a scale that rivals modern reservoir systems. But the dikes were only the beginning of the separation strategy, because even with the Great Barrier in place, the Aztecs still needed to bring fresh water from distant sources into their city. And this is where the second phase of their system reveals truly remarkable engineering. The Aztecs constructed two major aqueducts to bring fresh water from springs on the mainland into the heart of Tenochtitlan. The Chapultepec aqueduct, which drew water from springs at the base of Chapultepec Hill, located approximately 3 miles or 5 kilometers southwest of the city center, and the Coyoacan aqueduct, which tapped springs from the southern lakeshore. These weren't simple channels carved into the ground. They were elevated structures that carried water across the lake surface, built on thousands of wooden pilings driven into the lakebed and topped with stone and mortar troughs that maintained a consistent downward gradient to allow gravity to move the water without any pumping mechanism. The Chapultepec aqueduct, the better documented of the two, consisted of two parallel channels, each approximately 3 feet or 0.9 meters wide, running side by side for the entire 3-mile distance. And here's where the engineering sophistication becomes apparent. The dual-channel design wasn't redundancy for redundancy's sake, but a brilliant maintenance solution that allowed workers to shut down one channel for cleaning and repairs, while the other continued to supply the city, ensuring uninterrupted water service. If we examine the gradient carefully, the aqueduct descended approximately 30 to 40 feet, or 9 to 12 meters in elevation over its 3-mile length, creating a grade of about 0.2 to 0.3%, which is remarkably close to the optimal gradient that modern civil engineers aim for in gravity-fed water systems, steep enough to maintain flow, but shallow enough to prevent excessive velocity that could erode the channel or stir up sediment. Dr. Jeffrey Parsons, who conducted extensive archaeological surveys of the Basin of Mexico in the 1970s and 1980s, calculated that the Chapultepec aqueduct alone could deliver approximately 2.5 to 3 million gallons, or 9.5 to 11.4 million liters of water per day to Tenochtitlan, enough to provide about 7 to 8 gallons or 26 to 30 liters per person per day for a population of 300,000, which actually exceeds the World Health Organization's minimum recommendation of 13 to 20 liters per person per day for basic needs in modern humanitarian contexts. Notice how the aqueduct system functioned as what we might call a hydraulic plant without pumps, using the physics of gravity, pressure, and flow dynamics to move water across considerable distances with no energy input beyond the initial construction effort. The channels themselves were lined with a combination of tezontle, a porous volcanic rock that's abundant in the Valley of Mexico, and a mortar made from lime and volcanic ash that created a waterproof seal preventing leakage and contamination from the surrounding lake water. Archaeological excavations of aqueduct sections, particularly those conducted by Eduardo Matos Moctezuma during major salvage operations in Mexico City in the 1970s and 1980s, revealed that the Aztecs understood the importance of smooth channel surfaces for maintaining laminar flow, meaning water that moves in smooth, parallel layers rather than turbulent, chaotic motion that can stir up sediment and reduce flow efficiency. The interior surfaces of the aqueduct channels were polished smooth, and where the channels needed to turn or change elevation, the Aztecs incorporated gradual curves and transitional sections rather than sharp angles, demonstrating an empirical understanding of fluid dynamics principles that wouldn't be formally described mathematically until Daniel Bernoulli published his work on hydrodynamics in 1738, more than 2 centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlan. Even modern engineers acknowledge that the Aztec aqueducts represent optimal design for gravity-fed water transport. Professor Angel Palerme Vish, a hydraulic engineer who studied pre-Hispanic water systems extensively in the mid-20th century, conducted flow rate analyses on reconstructed aqueduct sections and found that the Aztec designs achieved approximately 92 to 95% flow efficiency compared to theoretical maximum, which is comparable to, or better than, many modern concrete aqueducts that suffer from friction losses and turbulence at joints and transitions. But here's where it gets strange. Bringing water into the city was only half the challenge, because once that fresh water arrived at various distribution points throughout Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs needed to ensure it remained clean and didn't become contaminated by the environment, by the crowds of people using it, or by standing stagnant long enough to develop biological growth that could make it unsafe to drink. And this is where the third phase of their system, water quality improvement through natural filtration and sedimentation, becomes crucial. The aqueducts didn't simply dump water into open pools where anyone could draw from them. Instead, they fed into a network of carefully designed fountains and distribution basins called apantles that incorporated multiple stages of what we now call passive water treatment. Archaeological evidence from excavations at the Templo Mayor and other sites in downtown Mexico City has revealed that these distribution basins were constructed with multiple chambers separated by walls with small openings near the bottom, creating a series of settling tanks where the principle of sedimentation removed suspended particles from the water. As water flowed from one chamber to the next, heavier particles settled to the bottom, and by the time water reached the final chamber where people drew their drinking water, much of the suspended sediment had been removed. Dr. Teresa Rojas Rabiela, an expert in Aztec agricultural and water systems at the Center for Research and Advanced Studies in Social Anthropology in Mexico City, has documented how these multi-chamber basins functioned according to Stokes' law, the principle that describes how particles settle in fluid based on their size and density. Larger, denser particles settle first in the initial chambers, while finer particles settle in subsequent chambers, resulting in progressively clearer water. What's remarkable is that this same principle underlies modern water treatment sedimentation tanks, yet the Aztecs implemented it without any knowledge of particle physics or the mathematical equations that describe settling rates, purely through careful observation and iterative refinement of their designs over generations. Moreover, archaeological evidence suggests the Aztecs incorporated biofilm-based filtration into their water system, though they certainly wouldn't have described it in those terms. Excavations of water channels and storage tanks have revealed that the Aztecs deliberately lined certain sections with specific types of aquatic plants, particularly water lilies and reeds, which created dense root systems along the channel bottoms and walls. Modern ecological engineering research has shown that these root systems host communities of beneficial bacteria that consume organic contaminants and sequester certain metals and minerals, effectively cleaning the water as it passes through, a process we now call constructed wetlands, or biological filtration, that's been rediscovered as an eco-friendly alternative to chemical water treatment in recent decades. The Aztecs were using this technique 5 centuries ago, not because they understood the microbiology involved, but because they observed that water passing through these planted channels tasted better and remained fresh longer than water that didn't. Dr. Ben A. Nelson, whose 2004 research on pre-Hispanic urban water systems examined the botanical evidence from Aztec water channels, identified remnants of at least 3 different species of aquatic plants that have known water-purifying properties. And he noted that these plants weren't randomly distributed, but were strategically placed in specific sections of the water system where they would have maximum effect, suggesting a sophisticated understanding of ecological engineering principles that integrated biological, chemical, and physical water treatment processes into a holistic system. Furthermore, some sections of the water channels contained layers of sand and gravel that created mechanical filtration beds, similar in concept to the rapid sand filters used in modern water treatment plants, where water percolates through the porous material and suspended particles are trapped in the spaces between the grains. And archaeological analysis of these filter beds by researchers at the National Institute of Anthropology and History has shown that the Aztecs used multiple grades of sand and gravel arranged in specific layers, with coarser material on top and finer material below, which is exactly the configuration that modern water engineers use to prevent clogging and maximize filtration efficiency. To understand this mystery further, we need to look at how the Aztecs stored water once it had been filtered and purified, because maintaining water quality over extended periods, the decades mentioned in our title, required preventing recontamination and biological growth during storage, and this is where the 4th phase of the system becomes critical. The Aztecs used a combination of large communal storage facilities and individual household storage vessels, and both types incorporated design features specifically intended to maintain water quality over time. The communal storage tanks, called zacales, were typically semi-subterranean structures built with stone walls and sealed with the same lime volcanic ash mortar used in the aqueducts, and they were deliberately positioned in shaded areas or partially buried to minimize water temperature fluctuations and reduce light exposure, both of which inhibit the growth of algae and bacteria. Archaeological investigations of these storage tanks, particularly those documented by William Sanders during his extensive settlement pattern surveys of the Basin of Mexico in the 1970s, revealed that the tanks were designed with several key features that modern water engineers recognize as essential for maintaining stored water quality. First, the tanks had covers or roofs to exclude light, debris, and animals. Second, they had small openings for drawing water that could be sealed when not in use to prevent contamination. Third, they had overflow channels positioned near the top to allow excess water to drain away during heavy rains rather than flooding the tank and potentially introducing contaminated surface water. And fourth, they had sediment traps or sumps at the bottom where any particles that settled out could be periodically removed without disturbing the main water volume. Dr. Deborah Nichols, whose work on Aztec provincial systems has been instrumental in understanding how Aztec engineering principles were applied across the empire, examined storage tank designs from multiple sites across the Basin of Mexico and found a remarkable consistency in these design features, suggesting that the Aztecs had developed a standardized approach to water storage based on proven principles that were disseminated and replicated throughout their territory. Individual households supplemented the communal water supply with their own storage vessels, typically large ceramic jars called canteros that could hold 5 to 10 gallons or 19 to 38 liters of water, and these vessels incorporated subtle but important design features that helped preserve water quality. Analysis of surviving examples and ceramic fragments from archaeological contexts shows that water storage vessels had narrow necks that reduced the surface area exposed to air, limiting evaporation and reducing the opportunity for contaminants to enter, and many had fitted lids made from ceramic or gourds that provided an additional barrier against contamination. The ceramic material itself played a role in water quality. The unglazed earthenware used by the Aztecs was slightly porous, which allowed the vessels to breathe in a way that prevented the anaerobic conditions that can lead to unpleasant odors and tastes in sealed containers, while the microporosity also had a slight cooling effect through evaporation that helped keep the water at a lower temperature than the ambient air, inhibiting bacterial growth. Some of these storage vessels had interior surfaces that were treated with plant resins or minerals that had antimicrobial properties, though the extent of this practice and its effectiveness remain subjects of ongoing research. Dr. Patricia Plunkett, whose work at the University of the Americas Puebla has focused on domestic archaeology in pre-Hispanic central Mexico, has documented how Aztec households typically kept multiple water vessels for different purposes. Some for immediate drinking water drawn fresh from public fountains that day, others for water that had been allowed to settle and clarify for a day or two, and still others for longer-term storage that might be held for weeks or even months as an emergency reserve against potential disruptions in the water supply. This multi-vessel storage strategy, she notes, is consistent with an understanding that water quality degrades over time and that the freshest water should be used first, while older water should be monitored and used for less critical purposes if its quality had declined, showing a practical awareness of water microbiology even without the theoretical framework to explain it. What's even more puzzling is how the Aztecs managed the entire system as an integrated network rather than a collection of isolated components, and this is where the fifth phase of their water system, the operational and maintenance infrastructure, demonstrates a level of organizational sophistication that equals or exceeds the engineering sophistication of the physical structures themselves. The Aztec state maintained a corps of specialized water workers called Atlachinolca, whose sole responsibility was the operation and maintenance of the water system, and these weren't casual laborers, but trained professionals who held specific positions within the administrative hierarchy of the city. Colonial-era sources, particularly the writings of Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, who compiled the Florentine Codex between 1545 and 1590, based on interviews with Aztec elders who remembered the pre-conquest city, describe in detail how the Atlachinolca were organized into teams responsible for different sections of the system, with supervisors who reported to higher officials who in turn reported directly to the Tlatoani, the Aztec emperor, illustrating that water management was considered a state priority of the highest order. These workers performed a range of tasks that modern water utilities would recognize immediately. They inspected the aqueducts daily for leaks or structural damage, cleared sediment from sedimentation basins on a regular schedule, removed aquatic vegetation from channels when it grew too thick and began impeding flow, repaired broken sections of channel or damaged pilings, adjusted floodgates and sluices to maintain optimal water levels in different parts of the system, and enforced regulations regarding water use and contamination prevention. The Aztecs had developed what we might call standard operating procedures for each of these tasks, passed down through apprenticeship and practice, ensuring that maintenance was performed consistently and effectively across the entire system. Dr. Michael Smith, whose archaeological work at Aztec provincial sites has provided invaluable insights into how Aztec urban systems functioned, has argued that this professional maintenance infrastructure was just as important to the long-term success of the water system as the engineering of the physical structures, because even the best-designed system will fail without proper operation and maintenance. And the Aztecs understood this principle thoroughly. The maintenance schedules themselves reveal sophisticated understanding of system dynamics and risk management. The dual-channel design of the aqueducts allowed for a rotating maintenance schedule where one channel was taken offline every dry season for thorough cleaning, inspection, and repair, while the other continued to supply the city. And this wasn't arbitrary timing. The dry season, typically from November through April in the Valley of Mexico, meant lower water demand due to increased rainfall collection and lower risk of flood events that might damage infrastructure under repair. Documentary sources from the early colonial period describe how the Atlachinolca would drain a channel section by section, manually removing accumulated sediment and biofilm using wooden scrapers and reed brushes, inspect the stone lining and mortar joints for cracks or deterioration, reseal any compromised sections with fresh mortar, and then refill and test the channel before returning it to service, a process that could take several weeks for the entire length of an aqueduct. This is essentially the same maintenance procedure that modern water utilities use for pipeline cleaning and rehabilitation, involving inspection, cleaning, repair, and testing before return to service. The sedimentation basins required more frequent maintenance. Archaeological evidence suggests they were cleaned every few weeks during the rainy season when sediment loads were highest, and less frequently during the dry season. Workers would carefully bail out water from one chamber at a time, remove the accumulated sediment, which was often used as agricultural fertilizer since it was rich in organic matter and minerals, scrub the walls and floor to remove biofilm and prevent algae growth, and then refill the chamber from the upstream section and allow it to equilibrate before drawing water from it again. The storage tanks underwent similar periodic maintenance, typically being drained completely once or twice a year, cleaned, inspected for cracks or contamination, and refilled with fresh water. And this maintenance was scheduled during the wet season, when water was abundant and alternative sources were available to supply the city, while tanks were offline. However, the operational sophistication went beyond just maintenance schedules. The Aztecs also implemented what we would now call water quality monitoring through sensory inspection and empirical testing. The Atlachinolca were trained to assess water quality through appearance, smell, and taste, and they knew the indicators of water that was beginning to degrade or had been contaminated. Colonial sources describe how workers would regularly sample water from different points in the system, looking for cloudiness that might indicate suspended sediment or algae growth, smelling for off odors that could signal organic decay or contamination, and tasting for saltiness that would indicate intrusion of lake water into the freshwater system, or for metallic or bitter flavors that might indicate contamination from minerals or plant matter. While these assessments seem primitive by modern analytical chemistry standards, they were actually quite effective for detecting the types of water quality problems that the Aztecs would have encountered, and they allowed for rapid response when problems were identified. If water at a particular fountain was found to be salty or off-tasting, workers could trace back upstream to identify the source of contamination, whether it was a breach in the aqueduct allowing lake water to intrude, a failure in a sluice gate, excessive algae growth in a storage tank, or some other issue, and they could then implement corrective measures before the problem spread throughout the system. Dr. Charles Gibson noted in his research that the Aztec administrative records maintained detailed accounts of water quality issues and the responses taken, though unfortunately most of these records were destroyed during the Spanish conquest. But the few fragments that survive and the descriptions in early colonial texts suggest a systematic approach to problem identification and resolution that would be recognizable to any modern water utility operator. The Aztecs also implemented regulations and social practices designed to prevent contamination of the water supply at various points in the system, functioning essentially as public health measures even though the Aztecs didn't conceptualize them in terms of disease prevention as we understand it today. It was strictly forbidden to wash clothing, bathe, or dispose of waste in or near the aqueducts, fountains, or storage facilities, and violations of these prohibitions were punished harshly. The Florentine Codex describes penalties ranging from public humiliation to corporal punishment, and even death for the most serious offenses, indicating how seriously the Aztec state took water quality protection. Designated areas for bathing and laundry were established away from drinking water sources, typically in sections of the lake or canals where the water flowed away from the city rather than toward it, showing an understanding of how contamination spreads downstream and the importance of keeping such activities separated from water supply infrastructure. The city's extensive canal system, which served as streets for canoe traffic, was deliberately separated from the drinking water aqueducts, with the canals carrying a mixture of lake water and urban drainage that was suitable for transportation and irrigation, but not for drinking, while the aqueducts carried only source-protected spring water that was reserved for human consumption. This segregation of water sources by use, what modern engineers call fit-for-purpose water supply, allowed the Aztecs to meet different needs with different quality water, maximizing efficiency and protecting their highest quality water for the most critical uses. Dr. Barbara Williams, whose work on Aztec urban planning has been influential in understanding how Aztec cities functioned as integrated systems, has noted that this deliberate segregation of water by quality and use is a sign of mature urban planning that many modern cities have only recently begun to implement seriously, with gray water recycling and tiered water quality systems emerging as solutions to water scarcity in the 21st century, mirroring principles the Aztecs employed in the 15th century. The social organization around water extended beyond regulations and enforcement to include ritual practices and cultural values that reinforced water conservation and protection. The Aztecs revered Chalchiuhtlicue, the goddess of rivers, lakes, streams, and all flowing water, and held regular ceremonies in her honor that emphasized the sacredness of clean water and the responsibility of the community to protect it. These rituals weren't merely symbolic. They reinforced social norms around water use and created collective buy-in for the regulations and maintenance efforts required to keep the system functioning. The Telpachcali, the schools where young Aztec commoners were educated, included instruction in proper water use and the importance of the water system, ensuring that each generation grew up understanding how the system worked and why it needed to be protected. Archaeological evidence from household contexts suggests that water conservation was practiced even though the city had an abundant supply. Ceramic vessels show signs of repeated use and careful handling, and household layouts often included small sediment-settling areas where gray water from cooking or washing could be clarified before being used for watering gardens, showing that the Aztecs valued water as a precious resource even when it was plentiful. This conservation ethic, combined with the robust supply infrastructure and rigorous maintenance program, created a resilient system that could withstand disruptions like droughts, earthquakes, or localized contamination events without catastrophic failure. And this resilience is perhaps the most impressive achievement of the entire system because it meant that the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan could rely on their water supply year after year, decade after decade, without interruption. Remarkably, when Spanish conquistadors under Hernán Cortés besieged Tenochtitlan in 1521, one of their key strategies was to cut off the city's water supply by destroying sections of the Chapultepec aqueduct, recognizing that the water system was critical to the city's ability to hold out against the siege. The fact that they had to actively sabotage the aqueduct demonstrates how robust the system was. It didn't fail on its own, didn't run dry during the months-long siege, and continued to function until it was deliberately destroyed, a testament to its engineering quality and operational resilience. Even after the conquest, the Spanish recognized the superiority of the Aztec water system and attempted to maintain and use it, though their understanding of how it functioned was imperfect and their maintenance efforts were less systematic than what the Atlachinolca had provided, leading to gradual degradation over the following decades. By the mid-16th century, as the Spanish rebuilt the city as Mexico City and dramatically altered the landscape by draining large sections of the lake to create more land for European-style construction, the integrated nature of the Aztec water system was progressively destroyed, and with it went the sophisticated balance that had kept the city supplied with clean water for nearly 2 centuries. The irony is profound. The Spanish, coming from a culture that prided itself on superior technology and civilization, couldn't maintain or replicate the water system of the primitive people they had conquered, and Mexico City went on to suffer from chronic water quality and supply problems for centuries afterward, issues that persist to some extent even today despite modern technology. This historical trajectory raises uncomfortable questions about what we mean by advanced civilization and challenges the narrative of European technological superiority that has dominated historical accounts for so long. If we examine closely the principles underlying the Aztec water system, we find they align almost perfectly with what modern sustainable engineering calls working with nature rather than against it, a philosophy that contemporary designers are only beginning to embrace after a century of energy-intensive, chemical-dependent water treatment that's proving increasingly expensive and environmentally problematic. The Aztecs didn't try to pump water uphill against gravity. They found sources at higher elevations and let gravity do the work, saving enormous amounts of energy. They didn't use chemicals to kill bacteria. They used physical filtration, sedimentation, and beneficial biological processes to purify water naturally, avoiding the chemical byproducts and residues that plague modern chlorination and chemical treatment systems. They didn't build massive centralized treatment plants requiring constant energy input. They distributed treatment processes throughout the system at multiple scales, from large sedimentation basins to individual household storage practices, creating redundancy and resilience. They didn't drain and pave over their water sources. They protected and enhanced them with dikes, managed vegetation, and careful control of land use around springs and streams, ensuring long-term sustainability. In every aspect, the Aztec approach embodied principles of ecological engineering, passive systems design, and sustainable resource management that modern engineers are struggling to rediscover and implement. Dr. Vernon Scarborough, whose comparative research on ancient water systems across Mesoamerica has revealed common principles of sustainability and ecological integration, argues that pre-Hispanic water systems, like those of the Aztecs, represent a different paradigm of engineering, one that emphasized harmony with natural systems, minimal energy input, and long-term sustainability over the immediate efficiency and control that characterize modern industrial approaches. And there's growing recognition that we have much to learn from these ancient systems as we face the water challenges of the 21st century. The knowledge required to design and operate a system of this sophistication wasn't written in books or encoded in mathematical equations. It was embedded in practice, passed down through apprenticeship, and continuously refined through observation and experimentation over generations. This raises a profound question. How much knowledge have we lost when we dismiss oral and practical traditions as primitive compared to written scientific knowledge? The Atlachinolca knew how water behaved in channels of different shapes and gradients. They knew how to maintain optimal flow without creating erosion or turbulence. They knew which plants improved water quality and which degraded it. They knew how to detect subtle signs of contamination before it became dangerous. They knew how to coordinate maintenance activities across a complex, interconnected system to avoid disruptions. And they knew how to train their successors in all of these skills. This was a body of hydraulic engineering knowledge that rivaled anything available in Europe at the same time. Yet it existed in a completely different form, not as books or academic disciplines, but as lived practice and accumulated wisdom. When the Spanish conquest destroyed the social institutions that transmitted this knowledge, killing many of the skilled practitioners, disrupting the apprenticeship systems, and imposing a foreign administrative structure that didn't value indigenous technical expertise, much of this knowledge was lost permanently, and we're still discovering just how sophisticated it was as archaeological research and historical analysis gradually reconstruct what the Aztecs knew and how they applied it. Dr. Angel Palerm Vich, reflecting on his decades of research into pre-Hispanic hydraulic systems, wrote that, "We must abandon the assumption that written scientific knowledge is necessarily superior to oral practical knowledge, because the Aztec engineers achieved results that equal or exceed what modern written engineering can accomplish in many respects, and they did so with a fraction of the resources and energy that our systems require, suggesting that different forms of knowledge can be equally valid and equally powerful depending on the context and goals." Moreover, the Aztec water system was not an isolated marvel, but part of a broader tradition of sophisticated water management that characterized many Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Maya, who built elaborate reservoir systems in the Yucatan limestone landscape where surface water was scarce, the Zapotec, who engineered terraced irrigation systems in the Oaxaca Valley, and the earlier civilizations of Teotihuacan and Monte Alban, who also demonstrated advanced hydraulic engineering capabilities. This suggests that hydraulic knowledge was a core component of Mesoamerican civilization, developed over thousands of years and shared across cultures through trade, diplomacy, and probably direct technical exchange between specialized practitioners. When we look at the water systems of Tenochtitlan in this broader context, we're not seeing an anomalous achievement, but rather the culmination of a long tradition of innovation and refinement in water engineering that was as fundamental to Mesoamerican civilization as metallurgy and mechanical engineering were to European and Asian civilizations during the same period. The fact that this tradition was largely destroyed during the colonial period and has been largely overlooked in global histories of technology, until quite recently, reflects more about the biases in how we tell the story of human technological development than about the actual capabilities and achievements of Mesoamerican peoples. If we're serious about understanding the full range of human technological achievement and learning from the successes and failures of past civilizations, we need to study systems like the Aztec water infrastructure with the same rigor and respect we bring to Roman aqueducts, Chinese canal systems, or Renaissance European engineering. And we need to recognize that sophistication comes in many forms, not all of which look like the industrial systems we're familiar with today. Interestingly, some aspects of the Aztec water system are now being reconsidered and adapted for modern contexts, as cities around the world face increasing water stress due to climate change, population growth, and pollution of water sources. The principle of source water protection through physical barriers, like the Aztec dikes separating fresh and saline water, is being applied in coastal areas where saltwater intrusion threatens freshwater aquifers, with engineered barriers designed to prevent mixing and maintain separate freshwater zones. The use of constructed wetlands for water purification, which the Aztecs implemented with their strategically placed aquatic plant communities, has become a major area of ecological engineering research and application, with hundreds of cities now using wetland systems for wastewater treatment and stormwater management, finding that these systems are often more cost-effective and more environmentally beneficial than conventional chemical treatment plants. The integration of water storage at multiple scales, from large communal reservoirs to small household storage, is being revived in water-scarce regions as a strategy to improve resilience and reduce dependence on continuous supply systems that are vulnerable to disruption. Even the organizational aspects of the Aztec system, the specialized workforce dedicated to maintenance, the regular inspection and cleaning schedules, the water quality monitoring through sensory assessment, are finding new relevance as water utilities worldwide recognize that sophisticated technology alone isn't sufficient without equally sophisticated operational practices to keep systems functioning properly over the long term. Dr. Lucia Carbone, an environmental engineer at the Autonomous Metropolitan University in Mexico City, who has studied both the ancient Aztec systems and modern water challenges in the megalopolis built over the ruins of Tenochtitlan, argues that the Aztec approach to water management offers valuable lessons for contemporary urban water planning, particularly in how they integrated multiple functions, supply, flood control, transportation, aquaculture, into a unified system that served multiple purposes simultaneously, and how they designed for long-term sustainability rather than short-term efficiency, something our modern systems often fail to achieve despite our supposedly superior technology. The physical remains of the Aztec water system are still being discovered and studied as archaeological excavations in Mexico City uncover buried sections of aqueducts, storage tanks, and distribution basins that have been hidden beneath centuries of urban development. These discoveries continue to revise our understanding of how the system functioned and how extensive it was. For example, excavations for the Mexico City metro system in the 1960s and 1970s unexpectedly revealed major sections of the Chapultepec aqueduct perfectly preserved in the mud and clay beneath the modern city. And these sections have provided invaluable data about construction techniques, materials, and operational details that weren't available from historical documents alone. More recently, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by teams from the National Institute of Anthropology and History have mapped previously unknown extensions of the canal network and identified locations of buried water infrastructure that haven't been excavated yet, suggesting that much remains to be discovered about the full extent and sophistication of the Aztec system. Each new discovery seems to reveal additional layers of complexity and ingenuity that weren't apparent from the historical record alone, and researchers increasingly recognize that the written accounts from Spanish chroniclers, while valuable, captured only a fraction of what the Aztec water system actually accomplished, because the conquistadors and early colonial administrators often lacked the technical knowledge to fully understand what they were seeing. The legacy of the Aztec water system extends far beyond its physical remains or its historical significance. It represents a fundamentally different approach to urban water management that prioritized sustainability, worked with natural processes rather than against them, and achieved remarkable results with minimal environmental impact and energy input. In an era where cities worldwide are grappling with water scarcity, aging infrastructure, climate change impacts on water supplies, and the enormous energy costs of conventional water treatment and distribution, the Aztec example offers valuable insights into alternative approaches that might be more resilient and sustainable in the long term. The principles they employed, source water protection, gravity-powered distribution, passive treatment through natural processes, distributed storage and treatment, professional maintenance infrastructure, and integration of water management with broader urban planning are all being reconsidered and adapted in various forms as contemporary engineers and planners search for more sustainable solutions to urban water challenges. The fact that we're rediscovering and revaluing these 500-year-old technologies and approaches speaks to both the sophistication of what the Aztecs achieved and the limitations of the industrial approach to water management that has dominated for the past century. What makes the Aztec water system truly remarkable isn't just that it worked, or even that it worked exceptionally well for nearly 2 centuries, supplying one of the world's largest cities. It's that it achieved all of this while maintaining harmony with the natural environment, using renewable resources, requiring minimal energy input, and creating a resilient system that could withstand disruptions without catastrophic failure. Modern water systems, for all their technological sophistication, often fail on these same metrics. They're energy-intensive, chemically dependent, environmentally disruptive, and surprisingly fragile when faced with unexpected challenges like droughts, floods, or infrastructure failures. The Aztecs, working with what we would consider primitive technology, created something that in many ways surpasses what we've achieved with all our modern capabilities, and that uncomfortable reality should make us pause and reconsider our assumptions about progress, technology, and what it means to be an advanced civilization. Perhaps the real measure of advancement isn't how much energy we can harness or how complex our machinery can be, but how well we can meet fundamental human needs while maintaining long-term sustainability and resilience, and by that measure, the Aztecs were remarkably advanced indeed. So, what do you think about the Aztec water system? Does it change your perspective on ancient engineering capabilities or on what we consider advanced technology? Are there other aspects of Aztec or Mesoamerican engineering that you'd like to explore? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this deep dive into ancient hydraulic engineering fascinating, consider subscribing for more explorations of how ancient civilizations solved problems in ways that continue to amaze and inspire us today. The story of how the Aztecs kept their water crystal clear for decades reminds us that human ingenuity takes many forms, that sophisticated solutions don't always require sophisticated technology, and that sometimes the wisest approach is to work with nature rather than trying to conquer it. Lessons that seem more relevant now than ever as we face the environmental and resource challenges of the 21st century.